Once you have cut out all of your pieces, the first thing you're going to do is to take your front yoke slash sleeve piece and mark on the slash line. So that is this one here. It's marked with slash line, and you also need to have these corner points onto your fabric. Now you're going to mark this onto the wrong side of your fabric. So I'm using chambray here, so this is the right side and this is the wrong side. And as you can see here, I've just marked on with some chalk where this goes. The next thing you need to do is to take your sleeve placket piece, so that's this one here with the notch on one end, and you are going to pre-press this. So you're going to do it on the outside. So this is the side of the notch, this is the interface side, and you are going to press it 1 centimeter over the top here and 1 centimeter over the side here, just pre-pressing. Open it back out and then press this center line in here as well. Now I'm going to turn my sleeve piece around like so, and I'm going to place my sleeve placket and my sleeve binding onto the fabric. So you want the right side of the sleeve placket and sleeve binding against the wrong side of your sleeve. So remembering this is the outer edge that we pre-pressed, I'm going to place the raw edge of the placket on the slash line like so, and I'm going to place the raw edge of the binding next to it like so, and then we're just going to pin that together. Once it's pinned in, you want to draw in the box that you are going to sew. So we're going to sew 8 millimeters from the raw edge over here. We're going to sew in a box like this. So I've just taken a chalk pen and a ruler and then just marked that in. I've also marked in where the triangle goes, because once we sew, we are going to actually snip through the middle here and into those triangles. So let's do that. In order to get a clean corner here, what you want to do when you get to the corner is to leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot your fabric around, and then place your presser foot back down again. And then you can keep sewing. Same thing, lift your presser foot, turn it around, and then keep sewing all the way down. That's the stitching done, and now we can take the pins out. So the sleeve plackets, that's the bigger piece, should be on the side that's bigger, as you can see, and the binding on the other side. So now we are just going to snip through here. So you're only snipping through one layer, which is the sleeve layer. And we're going to snip up to the triangle. And into the corners. Now, into the corners is through both layers, the sleeve and the placket and binding. When you snip, be careful that you reach just the corner. So stop about 1 millimeter before. You don't want there to be a hole if you turn this out and you snip too close to the stitching. But equally, it won't sit flat if you don't snip close enough. So about 1 millimeter from the edge is really important. So be careful when you're snipping here. Okay. If in doubt, I would always snip just a little bit less, because then you can always go back and re-snip a little bit more if you need to. So now we're going to turn this through and look at the other side. So just going to flip this over like so, to the other side here. We're going to press these triangles up. So let me do that, and then I'll show you what next. So I've done my pressing, and remembering all I've done is to flip the binding from the other side over to the right side. And I've pressed up these little triangles with the iron. And I've also pressed this in to meet the edge here. So you need to press your seam allowances towards the binding like so, You need to press the raw edge of your binding to meet the middle. And then we are going to fold this over like this. And we are going to stitch this edge down here, right next to the edge. This is the sleeve binding now stitched down, and I've stopped just past where the original stitching is. So I haven't sewn down these triangles up till here, as you can see. Now we're going to do the sleeve placket and finish off this section. So let me zoom in so you can see better. What I'm doing here now is to take the sleeve placket and turn it over through the gap. As before, you also need to press your seam allowances towards the placket. And then this is where it's really handy that you already pre-pressed down the halfway line on the outside edge and on the top edge here. So what we're going to do is to fold down this edge. We're also going to fold over at this edge, and we're going to fold over at the halfway point. So you can already start to see how this is meant to come together. It will take a slight bit of fiddling, but once you've got it, you can pin it in place. So you want to make sure that the sleeve placket is sitting over the binding. And here you can see that this is looking like it wants to stick out a bit, so you need to push that in and maybe pop another pin there, for example. And then you just need to pay attention when you're stitching. So now we are going to stitch this in place, and we are going to start in the corner here, and we're going to go in a box up like this and all the way down in one hit. You may also want to mark this in with chalk. This is the finished placket. This is how it looks from the right side, and I'll just flip it over and show you how it looks on the wrong side as well. So now you need to repeat this on the other sleeve. This is my second sleeve placket on the other side, and now I'm going to do the front pockets. So I'm going to continue using my second sleeve as the example here. If you lay it out like I have here, then you can see that the neckline is that curve there, and we are going to put pockets between the notches on the front here. So this is the right side up, this is the wrong side. And you'll also see that there's notches on your pockets. So you just need to find those, line them up, and then place it right sides together on the piece. Notches lined up there. And then we're going to sew between the notches. For the other half of the pocket, we are going to take the front piece, and you will know that the correct side is the long side. So this is the center front here, towards the center front, and this is towards the side. So you are going to find the notches and do exactly the same thing. Going to find the notches on your pocket, place it on, and sew between the notches. So on these are the pockets sewn on, and you're also going to understitch this lower pocket. So on the lower body piece, you're going to flip this up. You can press it if you want, and we're just going to put a line of stitching right next to the edge here. And the point of that is that so that when the pockets are completely in place, like so, that this pocket isn't tempted to flip out. So you're going to understitch, but only on the pocket piece that's attached to the lower body here. This is the understitching complete, and I've understitched between the notches. If in doubt, make sure that your stitching begins and ends before the notches, more here rather than here, because as I explained, the point of the understitching is so that the pocket doesn't flip out. It is not something that holds it to, it's not a seam holding line of stitching. So now we are going to place the pockets together, wrong sides together, like so. I'm going to pop in some pins, and we're going to sew all the way around the pocket. So I'm just going to pin this here. Now make sure that when you get to the edge, because this wants to fold under, you need to unfold that. This is the pocket with the understitching, because you want to stitch the edge of it to the other side, like so. This will become more clear once I've stitched the pocket together. So basically, you're going around 3 sides, 1, 2, 3. So I want to show you the pocket bags now stitched together. So they were stitched wrong sides together, and you can see where I said on the edge you need to make sure that the pocket squares or the pocket pieces are stitched together correctly. So this is the understitching, and you need to unfold it to make sure that you can do the stitching correctly. Okay, same on the other side. Now we are going to clip the corners, and if you have a fabric like mine that frays a bit, then we're just going to overlock these 3 edges. This is the pocket. I've now overlocked the edges and I've just trimmed off the corners. If you don't have a fabric that frays, then don't worry about the overlocking, because this is going to be the inside of the pocket. So what we're going to do now is to pull the pocket through, like so. I'm going to take my point turner so that I can get these corners out nicely. And then I'd suggest that you go over to your iron and give these a nice press. Okay, now we need to join the seams on either sides of the pocket. So I'm going to first lay it out. We can see that this is the neckline. So this is the neckline, this is the shoulder, and therefore you know that your pocket is going to want to face downwards, because that's what gravity will do. Now I'm going to take a couple of pins, because we're going to close up these seams on either side of the pocket. So first I'm going to just pin here a little bit. And then on the other side too. So it's just a rough pin for the moment, because what I want to show you is that you will see here that this really doesn't want to lie very flat. So I'm going to put this on the table and we're going to clip into it. So what we're going to do then, because ultimately you'll want to sew this seam together, okay, 1 centimeter along here. So let me just pop another pin. So this is the pocket, and the pocket is going to be facing down this way, and you can see that it's just not flat. So what we are going to do is to take some small scissors and clip. In terms of where to clip, this is my pocket bag here. This is the lower front, and I'm going to take my pocket here and just fold it over and clip. So there's 2 layers to clip. This one here that I've already done is the pocket layer, and then here where the notch was on the lower front, you also clip like so. So can you see now that this should lie much flatter when you put it back into position? So that's how it works. Let me do it on the other side as well so you can see. Again, let me just arrange this correctly. So you need to fold over this side. You need to release the stitching on the pocket. And also on the lower front. stitching, and that's lying nice and neatly now. Now I've sewn the seams together on either side of the pocket, so I'm going to lay it out to show you. This is the neckline, and I started stitching from about here all the way to the end near center front, and then I did the same thing. So you're going to do this in two parts. That's the first part, and then here I started over here near the armhole and I went back in towards the pocket. Now don't stitch all the way to the armhole at this stage. It will make life easier if you leave a small gap here. So I'm also going to show you the underside of the pocket. So if I lift it up, you can see what it looks like and where I've clipped. This is how it looks from the right side, so you can see that your pocket is here. And now if you want to, you can also go through and top stitch this edge down to hold the pocket in place. Otherwise, you can also just leave it loose, which is what I am going to do today. And then now you repeat on the other side. Now we are going to turn our attention to the back piece. There's quite a lot of notches, so please make sure that you've marked those in before you begin. They are all there for a reason. So we are first going to make the pleat on the back, and you can see from the pattern piece which direction it goes. So here I have my back piece, and the crease is where the center back is, and I've got two notches on either side of the center back, and I'm simply going to fold one towards the other. Okay, I'm going to pin that together. On the other side, same thing. Pin it. And then I'm just going to hold this together with this line of stitching about 1/2 centimeter from the edge. My pleat is basted in place now, and I'm now going to make a yoke sandwich. So I like to lay things out in the way that they will be in their final position where that's possible. So this is my lower back, and then I've got the yokes here. So the yokes will be eventually wrong sides facing together. Now the reason I do this is because then I can very easily just flip this yoke over to here, and then I know that this one needs to go under like this. And then I'll take my time to match the notches properly. So you should have double notches close to the armhole edge. So you need to line up all 3 layers of the double notches. Okay, and you can see that on the yokes there's 2 notches on either side of center back, and you need to make sure those ones line up with the pleat that you've just made, like this. And so forth. So once you finish doing all the pinning, then you are going to go through and sew the seam with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So this is the yoke sandwich sewn now with the 1 centimeter seam allowance. So you can see from the outside, this is how it looks. And on the inside, this is the inside yoke. On the inside, so we are going to look at the inside of the shirt. This is the inside yoke, and we are also going to understitch this inside yoke. So we are going to make a line of stitching very close to the edge, and we are going to stitch that to the seam allowance here. So we're not going to catch the rest of the outside yoke. You see? So this is the yoke again. This is the right side of the fabric, and I've done my line of understitching on the inside. So you need to fold, make sure all the seam allowances are pointing upwards towards the insides of the yoke, and then give everything a good press. Once you've done that, you can lay your back piece out right side facing up towards you, like so. And then we're going to do the side seam. So this is the back, and on the back you can tell easily which is the side seam from here down to the bottom. And there is a notch in the middle to help you as well. So I'm just going to pop a pin so you can see. It's about there. And now we're going to turn back to the front and pocket piece that we did before. So here's the pocket and here's the side seam. The side seam will actually start a little bit below this edge. If I show you on the paper pattern piece, it might be easier to see. So the side seam actually starts there and not at the raw edge. There's also a notch here, which matches to the back notch here. So we can put a pin in for clarity. Okay. So here is the side seam now. So that's been sewn, overlocked and pressed towards the back. And now we are going to join the shoulder and the arm. So I'm just going to flip this over so we're looking at the right side of the shirt, and you can see by the direction of the pleat, and I've got a different color of fabric on the outside versus the right side versus the wrong side here. So I'm just going to lay this out. So you can see this is my front yoke / sleeve, and then this is where we put in the pocket earlier. The side seam is here. So now we need to join the shoulders. So what we're going to do is going to flip the front piece over. We're going to move the sleeve out of the way, and we are going to look at the shoulder. You know it's the shoulder because this is the back neckline and this is the front neckline, so the shoulder lines up here. So let's take our pins, and we're just going to roughly pin for now so I can show you where everything goes. Okay, so you can see that there is an angle here on your front piece, and this corner here where the stitch will go 1 centimeter from the raw edge will line up with the corner of the shoulder seam here, like that. And so I'm just going to roughly pin it in place so that you can see what's happening. So this is the shoulder seam. When we stitch, we are then going to pivot, and you see there's going to be another notch here on your front piece. And we're kind of going to go in a square sort of corner. And you can see that the next notch lines up to the yoke. So this is the outside yoke and this is the inside yoke. Pop another pin there. Okay, again, I'm just doing this just to show you where all the pieces are going to join together. And then if you keep going, you'll see that there's 2 notches here. So that's actually the back. All right, so you're going to pin 2 notches here. And then finally, there's another notch here which aligns to the side seam that you've just overlocked. Like this. Okay. So again, purely just to show you, and then you can always double check because you can turn out your work and then just check that your pins are sitting in the place where you expected it. Okay, now this is just secured with pins, and I've just turned it out to double check it's going where I think it should go. So you've got the back neckline, the front neckline, the sleeve with the placket on the back, and that's looking okay. So now we can turn it back out so it's inside out, and then we can stitch. Because I'm going to be starting with the left hand side of the shirt when I'm wearing it, I'm going to start stitching with the yoke on top, so with the back yoke on top. Okay. So what you're looking at here is the inner yoke. This is the shoulder seam. And I'm approaching the corner, so I'm approaching the armhole of the shoulder seam. You can see that I've put some chalk marks here to indicate where the corner actually is. And this is meant to meet up with the front on the other side. So again, a couple more chalk marks here, just to show you where those points need to line up. So I'm going to put a pin through the front first, and then make sure these are well aligned. I'm also going to put a pin to the corner where it needs to go. So I'm just going to stitch up until this point. I'm getting very close to the pin now, so I'm just going to pull it out and do one more stitch. Now you need to get around this square corner here. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave the needle down, press a foot up, pivot, and then we're actually going to snip into this towards the corner. Okay, so this is the front piece, this back piece is on top right now. And to just dip a bit into it, near the corner. And then we're going to realign our fabric so that we can stitch the next section. So it just takes a little bit of maneuvering. And from before, I've actually pinned in the next notch here, as you can see, so you know where to go. Just going to take another pin, like so. Okay. And then make sure that all the other bits of fabric are out of the way underneath, that you haven't caught anything underneath here. And then we are going to continue stitching like this. Again with a 1 centimeter allowance. Once you've negotiated your corner here, you can just keep stitching. Don't sort of backstitch and take your needle off, just leave your needle in, keep on stitching all the way down here until you reach the double notches, which is where I'm at now. And then you should notice that your side seam, so where the overlocking is, that should match up with the notch on the piece underneath here. So I'm just going to pin that in place and then continue to stitch. This might be a little bit fiddly because you've already stitched other parts here for the pocket. So just line it up as best you can. Okay, and I sometimes use my needle to maneuver my fabric. It's quite handy. Make sure nothing's caught and then continue to stitch, making sure all the notches and everything else lines up that you've just pinned in place. This is the seam I've just sewed, the shoulder seam all the way down here. Next step is to overlock the shoulder seam and the armhole here. Now that this is overlocked, the last thing to do on this side is to close up the sleeve. So I'm going to start pinning from here. And again, I always start with what I call a bit of a rough pin to make sure I know where I'm going. So I'm just going to pop another one somewhere in the middle. And then you should see that this is actually all one long piece. So this is towards center front. Here's the pocket. And you see it all goes down the sleeve like this. So here's the part that you need to pin together quite well. I've stitched the seam now, and I just wanted to show you before I go and overlock it, because I actually started stitching on the side where the placket is, so the sleeve side, and that is because when you stitch along here, this sleeve is actually a little bit on the bias, whereas the other side is cut on the grain. So what this means is that if you have inadvertently stretched this out during handling, you might find that this side is a little bit longer than the straight edge side. So what that means is that if you sew from this side being the top, then it's going to be easier to ease in any extra length that you've got from it stretching out, so that you can still sew this line without getting puckers in it. Anyway, now I'm going to go and overlock this whole edge. Okay, so I've just overlocked the seam that I've just sewed, and I've turned it the right way out, and this is supposed to look like this. So my pocket here, this is one long line that goes along down the underarm. There's an optional step here to top stitch the front. So if you want to do that, you need to make sure your seam allowance is pointing towards the neck. So here's the pocket bag, that's the top. And then you just need to edge stitch all along here. Once you get close to the side seam, you will need to make sure that you've got everything out of the way as you sew. So I'm just going to carry on for a little bit. And now I'm at the sleeve, and because I'm at the sleeve and the sleeve is a tube, again, you just have to keep adjusting as you sew. Also put your hand underneath and make sure nothing is catching. And then just carry along in this manner until you reach the sleeve. I'm now going to put on the front placket, but you could also go back and finish the other sleeve and yoke if you wanted to, or you can just do the placket first and then go back and do it all together. The notch to pay attention to on the front placket is this one here, because this is what lines up with the top stitched seam. So this is your pocket, so you need to line that notch up with it. So I've pre-pressed my placket in half on the long side, and now I'm just going to pin together, and I'm going to stitch with a 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way down. Just need to match this notch here. Okay, so this is now sewn on the front, and you can see I've still got this crease here. I have flipped this over and pressed it so the seam allowance is facing towards the placket, and I've also gone and pressed it with a 1 centimeter edge here. So now we need to close up the placket, and you just use your crease line as a guide. And then there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can either stitch in the ditch, securing the side behind you, or you can stitch a little bit edge stitch, so 1 or 2 millimeters from the edge, whatever you prefer. The key thing to note is that when you're stitching along here to secure the placket, you must catch the stitching, you must catch the placket underneath. So I quite like to pin from the right side of the fabric, and when I pin, I can see where I'm catching the edge. If I haven't caught it enough, then I'm just going to move my pin slightly. For example, like this. And then I'm just going to pin again and make sure it's in the ditch where I want to stitch. So you can see now, if I just follow my pins, if I do this all the way down, I'm just going to follow my pins, and then I will catch this edge here. So now I'm just going to continue pinning all the way down. So here you can see how the pins look on the wrong side. So this is the right side of the shirt, and this is the wrong side. Alternatively, if you decided that you wanted to have a visible line of stitching, so you secure your placket a couple of millimeters in from the edge, then you just need to make sure that you pin your placket, you put your placket directly over the line of stitching that you made before. a bit like this. So then you can also just see it from the other side. Okay, so it just depends on what you want to do. There's different options, as in so. In this case, I decided to go for a visible line of stitching on my placket because I have this top stitching here on the front anyway. So I think that looks quite nice. So that's the front and that's the back. When it comes to the collar, I have fused one side and not the other. So this will be the top collar and this will be the under collar. Depending on what you like, if you want a stiffer collar, you can also fuse both sides. It's really personal preference in this case. To stitch the collars together, we're going to put them right sides together like so. And then we're going to pin. So again, just a couple of rough pins to demonstrate. Oops. And we are going to stitch from here, this edge, the short edge, all the way along the long edge and then up back again on the short edge in one hit. And we're going to use a 1 centimeter seam allowance. My top tip for you here would be that when you get to the corners, it's nice to draw a chalk mark so that you can actually see where you need to pivot your needle. So again, this is the same technique of leaving your needle down, pivoting your fabric, and then continuing to stitch that we've been doing throughout this shirt sew along. So I've just put a chalk mark here, and I'm going to put another one here, about the 1 centimeter mark, because that's the seam allowance. I'm going to stitch with the unfused piece on top because this is quite stable. And if anything's going to stretch out, it's going to be the collar without the fusible. So I'm going to leave this on top and I'm now going to stitch starting from here and around the corner. Once you've done the stitching, you'll want to clip at the corners to reduce bulk on both sides. And then on the fused side, you'll want to just trim it down back by about half. So go all the way along the long edge here. Okay, I'm going to keep going on there. And then you also want to do the short edge here. And that's just to reduce bulk and make it look a bit nicer when you come to turn it over. So once I've gone through and done all that, it is simply turning it over like so. And you might want to use a point turner as well to help you out a bit. Get a nice sharp collar on the edge, or a nice corner at least. You might also find that you can use a pin, and you can also just be very gently just tease out the corner a little bit if you're finding that there's bits that are a bit stuck, so you're not getting a nice corner. So you can also be very, very gentle, of course, so you don't make holes, and you'll get something like this. And then go and give it a good press. Then you can also top stitch the collar if you want to as well. Whether or not you top stitch, pressing is quite important for collars. And if you've only got fusible on one side, you'll want to be sure which one is the top collar and which one is the under collar. So this is what you'll see when you wear the shirt, the top side, in my case, with the fusible. So you want to make sure that your seam is actually rolled towards the back when you press. So you can see on the back, you can see a tiny bit of seam allowance here, or the seam here. Whereas on the front, you can't see it at all. So that's just the way I've deliberately pressed it. So now I can go and top stitch along this edge. This is the top stitched collar, and I've just put some masking tape with top written on it so I don't have to keep looking for which one is the fused side. Now we're going to take our collar stands and we're going to make a collar sandwich. So both of these are fused. So I'm just going to put one down right side facing up. I am going to find 2 notches, one here and the corresponding notch on the other side. And I'm going to place the collar so it matches up with the notch. So the edge of the collar matches the notch here. Okay, like I said, I've marked top here, but for now it doesn't really matter whether you have this side or this side first. Pop that there. And then now we're going to put the other side of the collar here. And you can see there's also a notch. So we're going to line that up correctly. Pop a pin in. And we want to line this up perfectly. And I'm going to fill in the rest with pins. It's exactly the same on the other side, so just make sure all your notches are matching. And we're going to make a line of stitching from the edge here all the way down, and this will be open. So let me just finish pinning this and then I will stitch it. Once you've finished your stitching, it should look something like this. And I've just started clipping into my corner here, because you're going to need to turn this out like this, and you don't want there to be bulk. So again, you can grade the seams as before. So you can also take your scissors and just trim off the seam allowance a bit like this. So again, and just continue all the way around so you have a bit less bulk sitting at the seam here. Okay, now I'm just going to, when you've done all that, then you turn it out and give everything a good press, and you should have something that looks a bit like this. Here we have the neckline of the shirt with the front plackets attached on both sides. If you take your collar and collar stand now and just imagine how it's going to look on the shirt. So this is the top, which is the way you'll see it when you wear it. So my collar stand is going to go something like this, with my collar folded back this way. So now I want to attach this collar stand to the shirt, and I only want to pin and sew one layer for now. There is a notch here. You can see it corresponding on the pattern piece. And that notch corresponds to where the front placket ends. So that's here. So I'm just going to pin that to begin with. And then I'm going to pin all the way around. So again, I always like to go to the other end first to begin with in terms of pinning. Put another pin there. Okay, and then go back and fill in the gaps. If you're finding that your neckline has stretched, you can go back and put some stay stitching on the front. So that's just a basting stitch about 5 millimeters from the raw edge on the longest length. Or you can go and press it, try and shrink it back into shape with your iron as well. That's also possible. If you feel like you need another notch, then you can always find the center point of the center back here, and you can then fold this undercollar in half and find the corresponding middle, and then that can be your notch to line up here if you feel like you need an extra reference point. Now the outer collar stand is attached to the shirt, and the inside collar stand, as you can see here, is quite loose. There's a few different ways to finish this, and we are going to use a burrito method, but if you want to do a collar in a different way, then feel free to do so. There's many different ways to get to the end result, and this will not affect any future step. So if you haven't given this method a go, then feel free to see if you like it. We are going to turn the collar so it is the right sides facing again, the collar stand. And then we are going to put the collar and the front placket. We're going to make kind of a burrito. So I'm pushing it inside the collar stand so that we can stitch the collar stand together, so you can line up the notch again here and pop a pin in. Okay, and make a line of stitching for a few centimeters this way. I'll demonstrate the move again on the other side. So we will turn it so it's inside out, and we will pop the collar and the front placket inside so that we can stitch the collar stand together. So again, just a bit fiddly, but it's all possible. Okay, so it looks a bit like this. And then we're just going to stitch for a few centimeters. Now I've done the stitching here, I am just going to turn it out. So just a gentle tug on the placket and on the collar, like this. And there you have it. So I've got a small, I'm not sure if I've got a small pucker there, I think it can be pressed out. So you see, it looks like that now. And this on the inside. Once you've got the end of the collar stand in place on both sides, you can fill in the gap here and secure the rest of the inner collar. So I like to press it in by about 1 centimeter, and then I am going to place it over the previous line of stitching and use a lot of pins to hold this in place. So you can begin sort of somewhere here, and then you can top stitch all the way around the inner collar, and that will hold it down. Now is also a good time to put in a label if you want. So if you are going to do that, I'd suggest you pop one here so that when you top stitch it, it's secured into place. I've pressed the collar, and so now it's all pinned in, and I've just placed it just over the line of stitching in the same way that we did the placket. It's going to be easiest to top stitch from the inside rather than the outside, I'd say. I think it's nicer if the inside is tidy. When you're wearing the shirt with the collar down, you won't notice too much if you inadvertently make a mistake on the stitching and it's not quite perfectly straight on the outside. It'll look nice when you hang up the shirt like this. Alternatively, if you were feeling really keen, of course, you could also just hand stitch and slip stitch this all the way along to secure it. This is the collar now stitched. This is the inside of the shirt, and this is the outside of the shirt. So I'm pretty happy with that. On the cuff, if you go to the sleeve, you'll see that on the side where your placket is, you should have 4 notches which correspond to these notches here on the pattern piece. So first you need to form 2 pleats, so you basically put them together. So I'm going to start from the outside. So you fold one to meet the other, pin it in, and repeat for the other one. And then we're just going to put a small line of stitches within the seam allowance, so 5 millimeters from the raw edge, to hold that in place. This is the pleats that are now basted in place. It should look something like that. When it comes to the cuffs, it's up to you how much interfacing you want to use. You will want to interface at least one side, but if you prefer a more structured cuff, then you can also interface 2 sides. On one of the sides, you need to press over by 1 centimeter, and then we are going to place it on top of the other cuff, like so. Add pins, and then going to stitch with a 1 centimeter allowance up here and around this edge, and then down this edge. This is the cuff I've just stitched, and I'm just going to trim the corners and turn it the right way out. Now that the cuff is turned out and pressed, you want to pin the edge that is not pressed and you want to pin it to the sleeve so you can sew it on. So this is the binding side, so you need to match up those edges like that. Pop a pin in and then keep going. So I've just done that there. And then here you will see that there are notches on your cuff piece. You can see those 3 here, and they correspond to where your pleats are. So you just need to line those up as well. And then once you finish pinning, then you can make a line of stitching 1 centimeter from the raw edge all along here. This is the cuff now stitched on. And we're now going to tuck this side in and place this over the fold over the previous line of stitching like this. And then we're going to top stitch all the way around the cuff. So this is very, very similar as the method that we used to sew on the placket earlier. This is the top stitching on the cuff now completed. So I've just gone all the way around. After you've top stitched both the cuffs, it's time to turn your attention to the hem. So we are nearly there. And because there's quite some curve in the shaping of the hem, you want to keep the hem fairly narrow. And the recommendation is for a 6mm hem, so that's about presser foot width. And you just need to take your iron and fold it over once, like so. And then to finish the hem, we're going to fold it over twice. So fold it over once more and then just put a line of stitching here. It does get a bit bulky here, so I'm just going to trim it down a little. If your fabric is a bit thick, what you can also do is just to put a line of overlocking along this edge and then fold it up like so at the overlocking and then just stitch it down. So that will be a less bulky finish than if you had a double turn hem, but it really depends on your fabric. So for here, I'm just going to do the standard double turn hem. So press this hem all the way around and fold over and stitch along the edge. So the hem is now finished, as you can see here. That's the back. I just need to trim off these loose threads. And the last thing to do is to put on your buttons. So your buttons can be anywhere between, say, 11 and 15mm ones. Mine are 15, but of course it's up to you and it's personal preference what you want to do. So you'll need 2 buttons for the cuffs, and then you'll need 7 for the shirt. So in total you'll need 9 buttons for the shirt and 13 if you're making the dress. Very helpfully, the pattern piece actually already shows you where you should put your button. So it's marked on here, remembering that there is a 1cm seam allowance. And on the front shirt, on the placket, you can see also where the buttons holes are marked for you. But of course, you can also try on your shirt first and see where it suits you to place the buttons. Now, in terms of buttonholes, you can make them in many different ways. You can do them by machine, you can do them by hand, and you just really need to do test runs and see what works best for your button and your fabric. So for buttons, you would typically want these to be between 3 and 5mm bigger than your actual button. So in my case, it will be 18 to 20mm, and this will just, but then my machine will actually decide this for me. When it comes to the buttonhole on the collar stand, you want it to start about 10mm from the edge here. So you can just mark that in with a piece of chalk, or however you prefer to mark your buttons, and make your buttonhole there. And then follow the button placket to see where your other buttons should go. When it comes to the cuff, you'll want to place your buttonhole on the side with the wider placket. So that's the narrow side and this is the wider side. And you want your buttonhole to start about 7 millimeters from the edge here. So I'm just going to place a mark here, and then the buttonhole will go horizontally like this. Because my machine makes buttonholes in one hit, so I just need to have a start point here so I know where to place the needle, and then the machine will do its job in making the rest of the buttonholes. But either way, it's useful to have a marking so you know where to begin. It's also in the middle of the cuff, the buttonhole. All the buttons are on the shirt now, and you can see all the nice top stitching details from the pattern. You can see it on the yoke, there's the pocket. You can see it on the collar, and of course also on the cuffs. And I also just want to show you the small piece of armhole seam at the front, which goes into the side seam here. So it's only a short section that we joined at the very beginning. And that's the finished shirt. I hope the sew along's been useful to you, and that you have the confidence to go and sew your own Olya and row with happiness. Thanks very much for watching.